J. Joshi. Yoshi.
Joshi. Thank you. Wow, what a great turnout this morning. I am thrilled to see that extra seats are being rolled into the room. Welcome to everybody. So this week we have a special guest. I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. J. Joshi. He has a new approach to patient care that I think you'll find really interesting. His background and his passion around patient care and patient outcomes really comes across. So I'm excited to welcome Dr. J. Joshi to 1 Million Cups.
Hello? Hello? You guys can hear me? Okay. How does this work then?
You just play to me when you want me to play.
Okay. Got it. Okay, cool. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate your time after such a eventful last night. I appreciate your time and effort. My name is Dr. J. Joshi, and I'm the founder of Prestige Clinics, the future on how healthcare should be delivered. Next slide. Prestige Clinics is a primary care model that focuses on improving patient outcome in terms that the patient can engage and feels empowered to participate in. The vision behind this model is that as a primary care physician, I found that much of the value we're providing the patients were not really manifested from the patient's side. The patients would wait 5 hours for 5 minutes of my time and then come back 3, 4, 5 months later. We do the same lab work, we do the same imaging, but little to no improvement takes place. The reason behind that is the model is not focused on improving outcomes. The model is service-oriented and a redundant manufacturing-based outdated model that does not improve patient outcome. So the vision behind Prestige Clinics was to create a patient-centric, comprehensive primary care model in which we create an experience for the patient in which he or she can consume the healthcare experience while feeling engaged, empowered, all through a customized delivery model that's set to improve patient outcomes. Our vision is based on providing transparency to the patient regarding his or her medical care, incorporate principles of shared decision making, as well as providing care in an honest, committed, responsive manner while providing patients with the level of respect that they deserve. Next slide. As mentioned, when people discuss various changes in healthcare, Obamacare, or whatever else will come in the future, they always talk about engaging the patient, providing a model of care that's better for the patient. The problem is nobody asks the patient what he or she wants. And as you can see here, people say, this is good for you, that's good for you, rather than asking the patient what he or she would like. Next slide. So our business model is predicated on taking a patient-centric approach to care. What happens is, based upon the clinical fundamentals, we set the parameters for how the care should take place. But within those parameters, we allow the patient to choose what aspects of care he or she should focus on. Take, for example, 2 diabetic patients, a 67-year-old Caucasian male working professional and a 43-year-old Hispanic female, mother of 2, stays at home. Both of them are diabetic. Both of them are type 2, and both of them take the same medication regimen, but they should not be treated the same way because the stresses they experience, the diets they eat, are vastly different, and all of that goes into how their care should be managed. And for the working professional, he may have more difficulty coming to clinic, and for the mother of 2, she just may have a hard time doing anything besides taking care of her kids. So you have to create a customized delivery model in which the patients understand what outcomes and chronic conditions they want to focus on, one, but then how they would like their care to be presented to them. And based upon that, we create a delivery model. Now let's talk about point 2 a little bit more in detail. Patient engagement in this modern era of healthcare is not just based on the traditional patient to physician clinic encounter. You see many home health visits, many telemedicine visits, text messaging, phone calls, and app methodologies now coming to the forefront. In fact, there are a significant number of academic articles through many prestigious academic institutions that delineate the value in these alternative forms of engagement. What we provide at Prestige Clinics is a model that the patients choose how they would like their follow-up, and based upon those set standardized protocols, we create a regimented methodology in which we engage and empower the patient above and beyond what is typical for a traditional outpatient primary care setting. Next slide. Now, the idea behind this model is that we empower the patient to take in a lot of value based upon customizing the delivery model. But inherent in that, we're creating unique forms of engagement, telemedicine visits, virtual reality visits, many of which patients are not accustomed to. So one of the things that we offer is we provide an incubator platform for many new technologies to germinate and implement their technologies. So many, as you know, are starting to go towards healthcare entrepreneurship. We provide the implementation platform within our customized delivery model, so healthcare IT entrepreneurs can use Prestige Clinics as a proving ground to validate and implement their health IT solution. And what we do through our Prestige model is cultivate that implementation model to make it patient-centric and focused on hitting key clinical outcomes that would then validate and help to scale the health IT platform. Next slide. We have our first clinic set up in Munster, Indiana, right on Calumet and Ridge Road. This location was deliberately set up based upon the foot and roadside traffic that happens on a daily basis. Since starting in September 15th, we have around 200 patients. I am the only practicing physician. We are looking to grow very strongly and expand into the Northwest Indiana area. Next slide. And next slide. Yeah, and make this a win for Northwest Indiana. The reason why we chose Munster in particular is because Munster has the commuter travel behavior that goes into Chicago and all of Northwest Indiana. And in discussions I had over the weekend with the Indiana Economic Development Center, they're very interested in seeing a model like this scale because you have the true definition of a platform technology in Prestige Clinics. As the clinics grow, the model for population health grows, the ability for entrepreneurs to capitalize and implement their health IT innovation grows, and it sets a model for how healthcare should be delivered that Indiana can set for the rest of the country. So the goal is to go from Munster throughout Northwest Indiana and have this region serve as the proving ground that will then lead to future expansion. Next slide. Now, how we define success and expansion, because that's critically important. When we talk about setting outcomes, inherently, we're defining standards and implementations. So we have to also implement those standards for ourselves as well. The way we define success is threefold. We define it based upon patient acquisition, patient retention, and patient satisfaction. The first two metrics are relatively straightforward. Patient acquisition and retention. How quickly are we growing? How well are we retaining the patients and meeting the outcome metrics based upon the Prestige model? The third metric is a little bit unique because it's taking a customized model that I developed on net promoter scores and creating a primary care centric version of surveying the patients. How satisfied were they with the quality of care? Would they recommend this model to their friends? Much more complicated than that, but the idea behind this net promoter score model in assessing patient satisfaction is that we can then iterate the unit economic models to then work for patients at a larger scale. So the idea is that we're constantly improving, simply stated. Next slide. There are a few other competitors in this space at a national level who are trying to implement this model of healthcare consumerism, but do not have as much an outcomes-based focus as we do. Oak Street Health was started by former Boston Consulting Group consultants, and they have around 10 sites, including 2 in the Northwest Indiana area. Medlion is located mostly in the rural areas, and they're a direct pay model. Eora Health and One Medical are also national chains that try to create a very nice experience, the Starbucks-ification of the primary care model, but none of them have that outcomes-based focus that Prestige Clinics has, and that's what makes us unique. Next slide. So in short, I thank you all for your time and look forward to fielding any questions. Thank you.
I'm not going to say this very well, and will seem appear to be skills, but he's interested exclusively in her, not in the support mechanism of family that is key to her success and growth. How do you address not just the patient, but the support mechanism that allows that patient to be, I assure you, that it's no different for your patient than it is for me. In my case, there's this total absence of concern from the way I'm treated by his staff to himself. Arrogance that is a flaw in an otherwise brilliant execution.
Yeah. So his question was, he had a negative experience with a family member regarding a spinal procedure, noted a certain level of arrogance in the communication, felt the physician was intelligent, capable, brilliant, but didn't appreciate the dialogue and the conversation and the tone of the communication. I think you hit on precisely what Prestige Clinics is trying to do. So the idea is that we identify the chronic care conditions and the outcomes to focus on, but then the delivery model is inherently patient-centric. So it's on your terms. So the problem you experience with physician arrogance, with lack of communication time, with a form of relationship that was decidedly unilateral, skewed towards the healthcare system. What we provide in this model is a heightened level of engagement and patient empowerment. And so the idea becomes more balanced. The relationship becomes more balanced. And the way we do that is through these set protocols. So we have follow-up protocols that state, you are set to come, patient X, every 3 months. But we are going to call you every 2 weeks to see how you're doing with your patient care, to see how that new medication is working for you, to see if you follow through on that pap smear. And what that does is provide additional points of engagement, one, but then two, make the patient aware of his or her health conditions and allow multiple points of engagement that allow more opportunities for communication. I'll give you a clear example about that, and then I'll share a little bit about the secret sauce behind that. One of the things we did in October is we provided free breast cancer screening education sessions. So we provided this packet to all the patients who would come in, educating them on the importance of breast cancer screening. But we wouldn't just tell them, get a mammogram. Why didn't you get a mammogram? What's wrong with you? We didn't leave it at that. What we did is we educated the patients on various Cancer Society guidelines on when is appropriate to get a mammogram, how frequently they should get a mammogram, and what are the signs and symptoms of a lump and what to do when you have a particular type of lump. So that is inherently what we're doing differently at Prestige Clinics. We want to have more forms of engagement that lead to patient empowerment, so the communication becomes much more balanced. So you don't have this conundrum where you're thinking, wow, brilliant physician, insert explicit X, person. It's good physician, better person. Now, what is the business model behind all of that? Well, the idea is by incorporating additional points of engagement, and there's a methodology behind it, we actually set the foundation for a population health management platform. And this is now where we start to get into what's the competitive advantage behind this and why it can't be replicated. I'm working with a few thought leaders throughout the country to actually create a back-end population health management platform that incorporates not just the medical record system, not just the patient visit or diagnostic codes, but these points of engagements, and demonstrating with statistical significance how each additional point of engagement, how each X more text message, phone call, email led to an improved outcome. And that level of population health management doesn't exist. And this isn't Starbucks for the sake of upcharging you for better coffee or perceived better coffee. This is a better quality so that we have tangible data to lead to improved outcomes. So when you talked about other aspects of healthcare, there are non-clinical aspects of healthcare that are communication driven, that are personality driven. What we do here through that back-end population health management platform is provide an additional data repository of information by which we can then iterate standards of care that we can scale and then lead to tangible improvement in outcomes. So you won't have that experience of good physician, bad person. It'll be good physician, better person.
For example, in Munster, there's a Target or there's a Starbucks in Target. Are you thinking of approaching hospitals and becoming sort of like the go-to clinic when it comes to your model?
I don't think convenience or the walk-in type model really reflects what we're trying to do. In fact, we're working with many payer systems to develop a risk model in which we would actually receive compensation if we prevent hospital visits, if we improve quality of care. So we have a more preventative oriented model. So it's not similar to a walk-in clinic or an ER in that sense. It's more comprehensive. And the analogy I make with Starbucks and quality is more on increased engagement, increased patient education, leading to better quality and better outcomes. So the convenience play is there because we incorporate telemedicine, phone calls, and text messages, but it's not convenience for the sake of expediting a healthcare process. It's convenience for the sake of engaging the patient more frequently. I think Manu was first, yeah.
So this is not a surprise. We've actually spoken about this before, about the passive point of care items. We feel there's going to be a huge boom from what this began. How does the passive point of care items, like we talked about, wheelchair, that's a weight scale that can actually alert you if there's a water retention issue or something like that. How does that engage with your model?
Yeah. So the idea behind all of this, and I'm glad you mentioned a wheelchair because we are working with PT, OT startups that are developing smart wearables and smart durable medical equipment to work with the prestige patients. And I'll give you an example of this. One company we're working with is Dividose. What they do is for any patient based upon their existing medical conditions and insurance type, they'll, without any additional cost to the patient, package all the medications and deliver it to the home in a day-by-day prepackaged slip. So as a patient, you don't have to worry about sorting all the pills or anything. It comes in a package, you just rip, pop, and you're done. And gauging how patients would perceive that technology allows us to understand which future patients it would be better for. So when you're dealing with new types of technologies or new forms of engagements, patients to insurance companies, providers to insurance companies, these innovations that come in through third parties create that experience. And that's why I want to create this model that's all inclusive, because it's not just one black box prestige clinics. It's an open environment where people can come in and have the liberty to implement their innovation.
Just as a follow-up, are you using like SBIR funding to do this work, this research? That's small business innovation research.
Yeah, so the conversation I had with Aaron over the weekend was around those lines. And so when he comes up to visit the clinic in December, we're going to discuss that.
I'll just tell you right now, if you look through any of the open SBIR grants right now, it's all passive point of care items.
Yeah.
They're going to give away billions of dollars for this.
Yeah. Thank you.
I see a benefit of this engagement, obviously being on the customer, the patient and the family, but also I can see, I don't know if you've investigated this all, the other part is the cost savings, right, by being proactive and everything else. Have you looked at a model where you place these clinics with large employers or groups of employers to help contain their healthcare costs by catching things early before they become big? Because I see that being the other part, how do you pay for this, right? And
Yeah.
if you can pay for it on saving on health insurance premium, I can see that as a good thing. The other, more of an input thing, your defining success, I didn't understand your axes. So on that, I mean, I saw that it's going up, and that's. I mean,
They always go up in projections. Yeah. They always go up. It's dummy numbers, but you're right. I'll go through those numbers, but please finish up.
I just didn't know what the x-axis was, the y-axis. So obviously it's better, or you would be showing it, but I didn't understand what you were showing.
Yeah. So there's a couple of parts to that question, so let me answer them in sequence. We're working with employers to incorporate the at-risk models right now. So the back-end population health management platform that we're creating, what basically I'm doing is creating that back-eye API connectivity from the medical record system into a data repository set. And once we have all of that data, I'm working with the academic institutions to create algorithms that quantify the clinical outcomes. When you quantify clinical outcomes, you can assign a dollar sign to them. When you assign a dollar sign to them, insurance like what you have to say. So then we were going to work with those at-risk payers who contract with employers. So we're meeting that trajectory right now. We're on that timeline. With regards to the KPIs, it was patient acquisition, patient retention, and then patient satisfaction. So these axes were just basically dummy numbers, but what they were supposed to say is, I remove the axis, it's time, and then it's patience. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so one of the things, when you go to the doctor, I find that is they have you come back, several times, or if you have a prescription that lapses, you gotta come into the office, and you have to pay another copay. And with your model, with the all-inclusive, is it kind of trying to get rid of that? And then the other thing is, most of the time we want to see the doctor. How do you spread yourself?
Well, the idea is that we will grow. I hope we grow. And so the model supersedes the strength of the individual, right? So the model of prestige clinics supersedes Dr. Joshi. That's the future model. But with regards to how it currently exists, if you look at the reimbursement models and how it's set, the most strongly correlated industry analogy is manufacturing. You just make products and you just churn them out. And when you apply that to patient care, it kind of makes sense in a perverse way that you just want the patients to keep coming back to your clinic. And physicians pride themselves on how long the waiting time that they have for their patients. So that model of just repeated visits, repeated copay, doesn't necessarily exist here. So how do we make it up on the other side? Well, we're working with payers to get reimbursed based upon quality. And so it's a risk I'm taking on, but the upside would be that if the quality is demonstrated through superior outcomes based upon the population management, the third parties quantifying it, and then the insurance companies providing reimbursement based upon that quantification, then it becomes a pretty lucrative model. And I'll show you the unit economics behind it. And I don't have as pretty a slide for this one, but I think it exemplifies, in a sense, what we're trying to do. So I don't want to get too intense into the math, but it's a delta C and a delta R. So that's an increase in cost relative to increase in revenue. So all of what I'm saying at a very broad level could be considered increased cost. It's increased infrastructure. The staffing model, FTEs per prestige clinic relative to a traditional primary care clinic is more. The amount of resources allocated and time spent per activity is more. So the cost structure is going to be greater than our other more basic primary care clinics. The goal is that there's going to be a higher revenue per patient that comes from the quality metric. And the growth then is based upon validating at this first slide, based upon the value reimbursements, that the delta R is greater than the delta C, which means that the per margin, per clinic site is greater, which then affords greater scalability.
It's Purdue, so indulge us with the metrics on how you measure the increased satisfaction or the better care. In other words, that's basically how you're going to get reimbursed, is that your people are doing better than, say, other folks. How are you going to prove that with a metric?
So let's do patient satisfaction. So one thing is, I won't get reimbursed by showing I do better. I'll get reimbursed with the quality metrics by having a set algorithm that has a financial metric to it and a quantified clinical metric to it that the insurance companies agree upon and that I agree upon. So how do we get to that point? Let's say patient satisfaction. So I first create surveys, which I've done. I think you've seen them. We have these data surveys that I create, and we ask certain questions using a Likert model, so it's a scientific survey. And then based upon those surveys, we create a data repository. And then there's analytics on how patient satisfaction can be quantified using Likert studies. There are like Press Ganey, HPAC scores and things like that. I then customize it based upon what is appropriate for a prestige clinic patient, and then the insurance companies will cross-reference the metrics I'm using. They'll agree upon it. They'll have some backlash. There'll be some negotiations as to what would be the appropriate metric. And then based upon us meeting that metrics, they would assign a reimbursements. So that's the complexity behind this model. It seems inherently simple, and I want to really emphasize that from a patient standpoint, it's beautifully simple. It's beautifully convenient. But inherent in that simplicity and that beauty, there's a back-end analytics that is focused on outcomes. And you can't have it simple and beautiful for the patient without having that complex background of all the population metrics to keep it simple and beautiful for the patient. Yeah.
Do you foresee any staffing issues? Because since you did say that you're really focused on patient engagement, and obviously we need staff to make those phone calls every 2 weeks and document all of that. So and those are, I believe, aren't billable hour
Yeah, I think that is a very big issue. So we've reached out to HR firms, and we have a model that once we start to scale, we're going to implement a set internal and external staffing based upon the typical turnover rate for many of the staff in the outpatient setting. So if you look at MAs, nursing assistants, LPNs, nurse practitioners, and physicians, each of them have a varying turnover rate and compensation model based upon their skill level and the services offered. So what we would do is, based upon how we're staffing the clinic now, identify what's working well and what's not working well to scale, and then create a model for staffing at a combination of internal hires and external hires that can meet the optimal staffing ratio based upon the tasks needed relative to their turnover rates.
How many patients do you have to have per clinic to be profitable per clinic? Or?
Well, we're profitable at 200, very profitable right now. I think the metric for a full patient portfolio per clinic site would be 500. So we're about 40% of the way there in 6 weeks.
In the Society of Innovators, we define innovation as solving a problem in a new way. How would you define the Joshi model?
I-
Innovative Center.
I think the Joshi model is redefining what is considered a successful metric for primary care based upon outcomes relative to then just the patient visit. So the key innovation here at a really fundamental level is that success for a clinical and financial standpoint is defined as a patient visit in traditional primary care. We take that success metric and go from a visit to actual outcome as a success metric. And I would say that's fundamentally what is different here. Sorry, Lori.
So you chose to start Prestige Clinics in Munster. Educational background is in Illinois. Why do you want to scale this in Indiana?
Well, I think Indiana is more favorable from a physician standpoint to grow. I think if you look at just the support that the state can provide, Indiana is a better state to start and grow a business than Illinois. I think just the experience I had with SPDC, with IEDC going down to Indianapolis, is just a better experience overall. The patient to physician ratios are optimal for a location like this. And also, because I was practicing in this area, I understood the culture of the people well. And so I wanted to stay in this area because I think Northwest Indiana is a real proving ground for how this model could potentially scale throughout the country. Because if you look at the people of Indiana, they're very reflective of the population throughout the country. And so if we were to then go from Munster, let's say, to Northwest Indiana, and then say expand to the Midwest from there, this would be the ideal proving ground to see how that model should scale further beyond.
What would be the potential impact of your business model or your reimbursement model if there were to be substantial changes to the
It's tough to say because we don't know what those changes are going to be, but let's make certain assumptions on those changes. Yeah, I think the key factors that this model is really dependent upon is insurance believing that reimbursements based upon value should be at a premium. So those practices, those hospital systems, those physicians that are intelligent enough to remodel their clinic to meet outcomes and then quantify those outcomes, if insurance companies continue to believe that they should be compensated at a premium for additional time and effort put in, then this model will continue to succeed. So I think for many physicians, they like this model, but they like it because they hear health IT is a hot industry, or it's cool to have your own app startup. And so you see so many physicians coming up with these little gadgets that are intended to help patient X communicate with Dr. Y. This goes much more beyond that. This is creating a metric for outcomes and then quantifying those outcomes. So as long as insurance companies see premiums in that, and based upon the 2009 changes that are taking place with MIPS and MACRA forms of reimbursement, I think this is the future. I think regardless of politician X's name and situation Y, we're going towards a value-based system, and I think that this model is robust enough to stand whichever party has a greater influence.
Jay, this is just an observation, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks to me as if you're kind of creating like the lean model for healthcare, where like manufacturing was lean, and we went through the whole lean thing with manufacturing 30 years ago. We're going through lean startup like over the last 5-10 years. Is that how you describe this possibly as like a lean healthcare?
I think that analogy is appropriate when you look at lean manufacturing focusing on outcomes, right? If you look at Kaizen and a few outcomes that the lean approach takes on with the manufacturing changes, we're very similar in that sense that everything is quantified based upon outcomes. When we look at patient satisfaction as not just a phone call, but a survey metric that is then reimbursed or benchmarked, everything down to the care, the engagement, and the surveys are all quantified. So I think that is a very fair, appropriate assessment.
I'm a slow learner, so I'm going to ask what you've already said. I'm fascinated by light bulb moments. What was the moment, conception, when you realized you had a great idea?
Well, thank you for thinking it's a great idea. Very humbled by that. I think it came down to the fact that anybody who spends time in a very busy primary care practice knows that you're constantly making gross approximations. And what I mean by that is you're constantly making clinical decisions with half information. So if a patient had, let's say, irregular heartbeat, they went to a cardiologist, they come back, 50% of the time you have the cardiology consult note, and 50% of the time you don't have it. So you're thinking, okay, well, since you're back and you didn't go to the hospital, maybe it's kind of okay. Let me see where we can go from there. Or, well, I have the blood work, but not the consultation note. Let me go from there. And I realized that people were making decisions with little to no information. It was more about making gross approximations. And I want to transition from a model of primary care that's going from gross approximations to refined iterations. And when you have that decision-making process much more robust and much more data-driven, you're providing better quality of care. I think that model, I think the moment probably came in after this was happening with about 4 or 5 patients. As that, I'm not doing a good job. Yeah.
Just talking about patient data. There are a lot of legal requirements around patient data. I just wondered if you folks saw any obstacles in terms of creating a database around it.
You have to get lawyers that are familiar with insurance companies. So I contracted out McGuire Woods because they helped develop a lot of the risk contracts for the Pioneer ACO model in Michigan. So I wanted to get lawyers that are familiar with reimbursement, alternative reimbursement models. I think the big factor here to simplify all the things that took place in the back end legal in terms of who owns the data, what data is presented to whom at what time, is there's a difference between data at an individual level and data at an aggregate level and data that's identified and de-identified. So if you want to create 4 quadrants that's based on individual, aggregate, identified, de-identified information, each of those 4 data groups have different legal parameters around them. So as long as you define what type of data is at which stage of the transfer from the medical record to the population data platform to the algorithms to the insurance company, then I think you're in pretty good shape, at least per my understanding. Yeah, knock on wood. Yeah. I think there's a question back there. Maybe not. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for your time, guys.
So I'd just like to ask one last question. I want to say this on behalf of the organizing committee for the 1 Million Cups. Ken Gonzalez, Lori Felt, Debbie Wargo, Eric's back there, and Jeff Conte. What we like to do at the end of your presentation is ask, what can we do for you?
I think just helping this to grow would really be essential. I mean this when I say I want to make this an Indiana win, and let's make this a Northwest Indiana win. Like over the weekend we're talking about Elevate Ventures and talking about the IEDC. Let's give this region something to be proud about and create that platform to invigorate healthcare entrepreneurs in the area that we have a place like nowhere else in the country where I can implement my health IT innovation. So let's make that dream a reality.
Well, we like to think that Kauffman Foundation created this so that you get a platform to engage with us, and there's also a key factor in creating networks. So with that, I'm introducing you to Dr. Sanjeev Rastogi.
Yeah,
And
we
I
met,
believe
yeah.
At some point, you may want to work with him on
Yeah.
his incubator
Yeah.
sorry I was late, but your points were right on. I completely agree that we work on approximations. We try to iterate, but you know, the data-driven, it's always a challenge putting data together because of interoperability and technology limitations. And I'd be very interested to see how you manage to get all this information from various sources. Franciscan healthcare system in this area that's growing by leaps and bounds is actually working pretty aggressively to build a platform where they provide all-inclusive care. And I think what you're doing is going to drive other providers to do the same thing, which is good for the country and good for the area.
Yeah.
Well, very good. Everyone, thank you all for coming. Let's celebrate a great victory last night, and I'm not talking about the election. Penguins came back from a 3-1 deficit.
Yeah.
We're completely nonpartisan here, but thank you all very much for coming. Please enjoy some more Coffee Cabin coffee. Please enjoy the networking, and if you are interested in presenting, I know there's a couple of innovators that I see out here. If you're interested in presenting, talk to one of us on the organizing committee, and we will schedule you as soon as we possibly can. So thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you. Appreciate it.